It began innocently enough. A group of friends, passionate about the paranormal and the unexplained, had been researching rumors of an ancient stone buried deep in the ruins of an old house. This house, forgotten by time and overgrown with vines, stood silently in the woods, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching them approach. The air around the house was thick, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and decaying wood. Inside, the air was musty and thick with dust, as though the house had not been touched in decades. The dim light barely pierced through the cracked windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. Everything was covered in dust, as if the house had been frozen in time. Faded portraits hung crookedly on the walls, their glass long since cracked. The smell of mildew was sharp, a harsh contrast to the musty scent that filled the room. The silence was deafening. The stone sat half-buried beneath an old rug, a forgotten relic of the past. It was small, unremarkable in appearance at first glance, but as one of the group members, Sarah, reached out to touch it, there was an immediate change. A strange vibration hummed beneath her fingertips, as though the stone were alive. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. Something was shifting, like the house was waking up, slowly stretching out its limbs after years of slumber. The others glanced at her, a look of unease in their eyes. As Sarah's fingers grazed the stone, it began to pulse. At first, it was just a faint glow, barely perceptible in the dim light. But then, as if in response to her touch, the stone's energy intensified. A crackling sound filled the room, like static electricity building up in the air. The glow spread from the stone, illuminating the room with a sickly green light. The walls seemed to distort, rippling as though they were being seen through a heat wave. Shadows moved unnaturally, twisting in ways that defied explanation. The temperature dropped suddenly, a chill settling in their bones. The smell of ozone filled the air, sharp and metallic. It was the smell of something unnatural, something not of this world. The stone trembled in Sarah's hand, and with a sudden burst of energy, a dark swirl of energy erupted from it, growing larger by the second. The ground beneath their feet seemed to quake, the very foundation of the house shifting. The group stepped back in terror, but the portal only grew. A dark void began to take shape, an endless chasm of swirling shadows and mist. The whispers began, soft at first, distant voices speaking in languages that sounded alien, their words garbled and unintelligible. They couldn't look away. Fear kept them frozen in place, the air growing thick and heavy with each passing second. Something was happening, something they couldn't control. And the room, no, the world itself, was beginning to change. The group's panic escalated as the portal grew, its force becoming unbearable. The walls of the room groaned, as if the house itself were screaming in agony. Dust and debris flew through the air as the shaking intensified, the floorboards beneath their feet splintering and cracking with each violent tremor. One by one, they tried to reach for the stone, desperate to reverse whatever had been set in motion. But their hands shook, fumbling for the stone as if it were something alien to them. They could feel the portal's pull, a magnetic force that seemed to latch onto their very souls, dragging them closer to the swirling abyss. The air around them thickened, each breath heavier than the last. It was as if the room had become a living thing, breathing with a life of its own. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they reached out, their trembling fingers grazing the stone, but it did nothing to stop the portal's growth. The glowing vortex expanded, becoming a swirling storm of black tendrils and swirling mist. It was like a hole in reality itself, pulling at the very fabric of the world around them. The temperature dropped so quickly that their breath came out in visible puffs, the cold seeping into their bones. No matter what they did, no matter how hard they tried to stop it, the portal grew stronger. Their cries of fear echoed through the room, but they were drowned out by the rising hum of the vortex, a low guttural sound that made the air vibrate. As the group tried to pull away, the walls of the room seemed to fold in on themselves, stretching like rubber, bending at impossible angles. The corners of the room turned into sharp, jagged shapes, and the air shimmered as if reality itself were breaking apart. The faces of the group were filled with a mix of terror and disbelief, their eyes wide with horror as they struggled to escape the portal's pull. It felt as though their very souls were being drawn toward the black abyss. They tried to scream, but their voices were swallowed by the strange hum that had overtaken the room. The world around them was spinning, warping, the ground beneath them becoming a blur of distorted shapes and colors. It was no longer just the room that was changing, it was everything. Time itself felt warped. The clock on the wall ticked backward, and the shadows in the corners grew longer, twisted into shapes that didn't belong. The house was no longer a house. It had become something else, something foreign. They could feel the portal's influence taking hold of their minds. Reality itself was unraveling, and they couldn't escape the growing horror that clawed at their sanity. The room, the world, their very existence. It was slipping through their fingers. They were no longer sure if they were even in the same place, or if this was some twisted version of reality. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the portal snapped shut. The room fell into an eerie silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The walls, once warped and twisted, returned to their original state, but the air was still thick with unease. The stone, now silent and cold, lay motionless on the floor, as though it had never been touched. The group was left standing there, breathless, disoriented, unsure of what had just happened. But deep down, they knew something had changed. The house no longer felt like the same place. It had been altered, tainted. And the terror that had gripped them, it wasn't gone. The whispers remained, soft, faint, but still there. They could hear them in the back of their minds, clawing at the edges of their thoughts. Something was watching them, something from the other side. The portal might have closed, but the door was left slightly open,